Hello, everybody.
Turn this up in my headphones, Charles.
Turning it up. Hello, everyone, one and all. Welcome back to another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. My name is Charles. I'll be your co-host today. And with me, as always, is my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend here, Charles.
Let's talk some fantasy, man. Today's an exciting day. We are continuing our discussion of the Poppy War series with The Dragon Republic by R.F. Kuang.
Yeah, I mean, y'all know how passionate I am about the Poppy War series, and finally getting the chance over here to... I just finished The Dragon Republic today and really enjoyed it, and I'm pumped, Charles. I'm pumped to get into a conversation about this awesome novel.
Yeah, I'm super excited to jump into it too. This is one of the this is the first series that we both are reading for the first time, and this is the first time we're actually talking about this book, which is very exciting. We have that new book energy going on. Curious to see what your thoughts are on this book.
Still has that new book smell, Charles.
That's right. So I guess I'll just give a quick introduction of the Dragon Republic, and then we'll jump right into our discussion. So,
let's do it.
All right. The epic, militaristic, grimdark, 20th century China-inspired Poppy War series continues with Book 2, The Dragon Republic by R.F. Kuang. The third battle of the Poppy War has just ended, and though Shaman Rin struggles with PTSD, guilt, drug addiction, etc., she refuses to give in until she avenges she doesn't avenge the Empress. She gets her revenge against the treacherous Empress who betrayed Rin's homeland to its enemies. Her only hope is to join forces with the powerful dragon warlord who plots to conquer Nakan, unseat the Empress, and create a new republic. I had written, for some reason, I wrote, she avenges the treacherous Empress. I was like, that's not right.
Maybe you're trying to say avenges Alton.
Alton, the Psyche, herself, I guess, because the Empress betrayed her and her peoples. And even from the previous Poppy Wars, the Empress has betrayed her people. So she's just coming at it. She's just hungry for revenge at the beginning of this book. And that's where the Poppy War, Book 1, had left us.
Yeah. And in case you didn't already know, these buddy read discussion episodes are full of spoilers of the book that we are reading right now, meaning The Dragon Republic for this episode. So if you haven't yet read it, then we recommend checking out one of our other awesome spoiler-free episodes. If you haven't read the Poppy War series at all, you can check out.
And we also recommend reading the Poppy War series as well. So just know that it was good. Thank you for listening. And to avoid spoilers, you may want to check out right now and come back. But definitely read it.
Yep.
All right. So when we start the Dragon Republic, we are introduced to Rin, and Rin has just committed a mass genocide of a people, basically. She used the power of the Phoenix at the end of the Poppy War to eliminate the enemy, basically. She dropped the representation of a nuclear bomb on a whole country, thus ending the Poppy War. And what we see now is Rin, she's commanding the Psyche, but she's also really struggling at these moments. You know, she's waking up, and every time she wakes up, she has to check to make sure she's not chained and shackled. And she's become addicted to opiates, and she's basically kind of shying away from her responsibilities as the leader of the Psyche, and she's really just trying to hang on. The only thing kind of keeping her going is her plot to assassinate the Empress.
Yeah, interesting seeing Rin, someone who we gave so much credit for being so proactive in our previous episode on this book, in our The Poppy War buddy read,
Hmm.
where she will just do whatever it takes, and she's very much just constantly making moves and trying to be in control of things. And then, rightfully so, after committing such an atrocity, she's in a totally different place now. And seeing how much she's struggling with it, I think, really helps drive home the point that Kuang is getting at here, or at least what I think Kuang is getting at here, which is how horrible an atrocity it was, what Rin did, and that she, as a person who does have feelings, whether she uh, likes to admit it sometimes or not, is really, really struggling with the guilt here.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a great way to kind of start her character arc by putting her at this is close to her rock bottom essentially. She's in the thick of her drug addiction, and that's really kind of capacitated her, and at she's still fresh off of a lot of guilt from basically the war crimes that she's committed, and she's still like she's still kind of serving under the pirate lord. I'm not sure how to pronounce this. Mong, Moag, Moag. I don't know, but the pirate queen basically, and she's just kind of going through the motions right now. She's thinking about Alton. She's thinking about um, the Empress, and she's just kind of going through the motions here. So we know Rin's character arc through this whole book is eventually she gains her independence and belief in herself almost. So it's calculated by Kuang that we start in the beginning with her totally just out of it.
Yeah, it's, I think, a really good place to go for Kuang in terms of being able to tell another story after covering so much in the Poppy War, because we spoke about in our last episode many times, I think, how Kuang covers a trilogy's worth
Yeah.
of events extremely well in the first book, and it probably could have been a standalone, and I would guess that it was kind of written to be a, you know, could be a standalone, but with sequel potential.
Right.
And because it's been such a hit, people are demanding more and more. And I was wondering, hey, how can we, where can we go from here when
Right.
this is about war with a country that Rin just blew off the face of the map?
Right.
And it starts, I think, where it needs to, and that's with Rin struggling with the ramifications of what she's done. And the only thing really on her mind that's anything of an objective is trying to kill the Empress. And
Right.
if she basically says at points, if she didn't have that, she wouldn't want to be alive anymore at the start of this book.
That's right. And there's a really good quote towards the beginning of this book that I wanted to say so that we can compare it to a quote that she says at the end. But right here in the beginning, she says the line, she didn't care about anyone's vision for the future. She stopped wanting to be great to carve out her place in history a long time ago, since she'd learned the cost. So that's kind of describes her headspace at the beginning of this book, where she's like, you know what, I'm tired of trying to fight these other people's wars. I don't really have a sense of nationalism. I don't really have a family. I don't really have anywhere to go home to. At this point, I just want to get revenge on the person that caused me so much misery. And that's kind of the driving force of the beginning of this book. And that's what causes her to eventually join forces with the Dragon Warlord, Viceroy.
Yeah, I I'm wondering, Charles, what was it like for you reading Rin in such a rough place, such a different version of Rin than what we got in the first book?
I appreciated it. I think Kuang did a good job of writing in the facet of her personality. Like, look, we all have ups and downs. We all go through phases and moments, and especially when you're addicted to something as addictive and crippling as like heroin, essentially. And I think Kuang is doing a good job of writing this kind of rock bottom moment. And also, because I felt this reading Rin's story in the beginning, in the Poppy War, I was like, what is she even putting herself through all of this for? Like, if I was as powerful as her, I'd just post up in a hut somewhere and just stay away from all the drama and the horrible gore and violence, and like everyone's getting her down. And that was kind of me going into this. So to see that she is also kind of burned out on that as well, it's like I've seen enough violence for one lifetime. I really, at this point, all I want to do is kill the Empress. So I liked it. I think it's a good place to start for this book, and I think Kuang makes a very distinct point of ending this book on like the totally flip side. So I appreciated it.
Yeah, you're a very different person than Rin, Charles. So you're, I would just go to a hut. It's very, it's a very different choice than what Rin ends up making. I think that it is interesting to stop and think about what Rin puts herself through, everything she puts herself through for. And the thing I kept seeing pop up was this stuff about identity and finding some sense of her own significance or mattering.
Right.
And there's lines throughout. There's one. This is kind of near the end, but just to stay on this topic of why is Rin do what she does, where she says she was also jealous that she was also jealous that Neja's entire identity did not hinge on his shamanic abilities. That's one
Right.
where, and she's also got these lines like toward the end where she says, "I'm supposed to be a soldier." Rin shouted, "What the f am I supposed to do now?" And the words written out there, I just can't say it on our
Right.
clean podcast. But
Right.
throughout, she just kind of has this piece where, as touched on the Poppy War as well, if she wasn't a soldier, if she wasn't a shaman, then she feels like she's nothing.
Right.
And
That's a good point. And you also made a good point of how she is like part of her character is that she's drawn to power and she's drawn to people in power. And one of her personality traits is she just seeks approval from people that have more
yeah,
power than she does. So I think that's another reason why she doesn't just post up in a hut somewhere, is because she idolizes this idea of having power and using power, and that's constantly weaved into this. And I also think she's just a violent person as well, as much as she suffers from the stress of war and the aftermath of it. She also revels in wielding that power and wants to be around people that are powerful as well. And she finds home and with the rest of the psych, who are also fellow shamans and things like that. And we know from her talks with Neza, which again we're skipping forward, about her philosophy on shamanic abilities and using them and things like that. So I get it. Like, those are all have been woven into her personality from the start, of her desire to be smarter than everyone else, stronger than everyone else, and also her desire to serve and learn from those around her that have these leadership roles.
well said, Charles. And
Mhm.
that's such an interesting piece of Rin's character that makes her so well rounded. Is that part of consistently throughout this series so far, wanting the approval and validation from these authority figures
Mhm.
in her life that she admires and respects. It ranges back to Master Irja at the academy and
Even her tutor
sh-
Phelan at the very beginning.
Tutor Phelan. I think then, of course, that comes up constantly throughout this book with Visera
Yes, she
as
idolizes him so much.
yeah,
And she even can't shake the ghost of Alton as well. It comes in so
true.
much throughout this. And I always, like, even most of the way through Dragon Republic, saw this character trait. I was like, so bizarre that someone who, even at the very beginning with, like,
Hmm.
the Pirate Queen's, like, um, her sort of pirate government, she just is like, get out of my way. I don't, like, I need to speak to the pirate queen. She's like, oh, she's unavailable. It's like, I don't care. Get out of my way. She's like, no one touches me. I'm like, I will kill you. She like doesn't back
Hmm.
down when people try and block her path. Yet she also is obsessed with seeking these people's approval. And one of my favorite parts of this book, particularly the Dragon Republic, is this whole book is essentially how she kind of shakes that off and gets herself away from that personality trait and is like, you know what? I don't need to seek approval from anyone because I am that person now. And so I think this whole book gets from that point of just, I don't want to live anymore. I'm trying to seek revenge. I drawn to this dragon warlord too. I can be my own warlord essentially. So that whole character trait that she has, this book is basically her character arc in this book is changing and shaking that off, which was I liked to see. I was very happy with her character arc by the end.
That's a great point, Charles. I was grappling with some of that as a theme of the first two books, right? We're jumping way ahead, and maybe this podcast just won't go the way of jumping from plot point to plot point. We'll see what ends up happening here, but uh, the the book pretty much ends with this piece about autonomy, right? There's this quote toward the end. She had thought that being a weapon might give her peace, that it might place the blame of blood soaked decisions on someone else so that she was not responsible for the deaths at her hands. But all that had done was make her blind, stupid, and so easily manipulated. And it goes on to say she was finished taking orders. Whatever she did next would be her sole autonomous choice.
Right.
And I'm wondering, Charles, I know she was following Alton a lot in the first book,
Mm-hmm.
but it does feel like she, push comes to shove, ends up making her own decisions in that first book. And it almost feels like, though she wanted validation, all this kind of stuff, uh, that she. I was kind of interpreting at first as like the first book, she learns that just pursuing what you want at any cost has, well, costs, lots of costs that are really
Right.
hard. And then in the second book, she learns, well, you can't go the complete opposite way and just be someone's weapon, as she says here. Because then you don't even get to choose your own misery, which is kind of grabbing from the a line in the Poppy War, the first book, where she says, well, at least it was a misery she's chosen. You actually just end up being manipulated by other people who are willing to
Yeah.
be Machiavellian in the way that Rin often was in that first book.
Right.
So, Charles, do you see it as the two books progressed her like in a straight line toward this point where she's overcome it, or do you see it more like how I was seeing it, of like the first book she learns the lesson of you can't go all in on just your own stuff, and then the second book she learns that you can't just be someone else's weapon either?
I would agree with that. I would add another kind of nuanced layer to it. For me, Kuang does a really interesting job with Rin's character, right? Of splitting the difference between like self-confidence and then also this idea of accepting responsibility. I think most cases they go hand in hand, but Rin's case was unique in that she always had self-confidence and she's not afraid to stand up to authority, and by the end of the Poppy War she was able to make choices for herself and go in her own direction and pursue her own kind of quest for power, like you were saying. But she was still having an issue with responsibility. She felt like it was kind of everyone for themselves kind of thing. She never felt like she could lead people. She was still getting bossed around. Like in the beginning, she's getting bossed around by the Pirate Queen, and the Pirate Queen just is like, everyone around her is like, she's just gonna like kill you, and right away, the first opportunity, the Pirate Queen is like attacks her and would have killed her if the Dragon Warlord didn't step in. So I think this whole idea of her mentality as a soldier and as a follower is the huge thing she had to overcome in Dragon Republic, because she wields a power that would make her strong enough to be someone in power, but it took her so long, and she had to go through like fight for everyone else before she decided she was going to fight for herself, and also take the leadership role, which like she was the commander of the psych, but she wasn't good at it, and she even admits many times that she never like felt like she did anything right, and she has these talks with everyone about how she failed them and she was too busy getting high to be a effective leader and all that. But by the end, she becomes a confident ruler. And for me, that's that distinction, that individual self-confidence versus that acceptive responsibility. And that's kind of how I see these two books play out.
That actually, it really helps clarify things for me, Charles. That's a great way to think about it. I appreciate you saying all that, because it was this piece where she was never afraid to make her own decisions on her own behalf in the first book, right? She just, if anything, she could probably use a little bit more gratification delay skills, right? She's very impulsive, but she would make decisions and just be like, I'm going to suffer whatever consequences come when I make these decisions. But she never had that, she never wanted to be a leader where other people would have to deal with the consequences of her decisions.
Right.
And this book helped her get to the point where by the end she's like, no, I need to be a general. I need to be someone in charge. And there is a difference between that and just your own, hey, I'll make choices for myself. And even
when she was making those choices, right, when she dropped that bomb on the enemy, like she saw that as a choice she made for herself. Like, I took the power of the Phoenix and I ended the war. But then in this book, she's dealing with the responsibility of that she had been trying to ignore, of like, well, I did, kill a lot of innocent people as well. It didn't really solve anything. We're still fighting. And, the psych is now wanted war criminals. So even when she was acting in self-confidence, she's still now learning to accept the responsibility of it. Same thing with Alton, right? Because she's fighting the ghost of Alton like literally multiple times throughout the first 3/4 of this book, and I think that's her also accepting responsibility as someone who was fighting with the psych and who's taken over command, and Alton was the one before her, and she just has to embrace that. So that was kind of how I saw her character arc going throughout this whole series, and it's interesting to see how all of these figures that she's following, from the Pirate Queen to Alton to the Dragon Warlord, to the Empress, and how they all treat her. It's all the same. And it takes all of that betrayal to finally get her to stand up. So that whole character trait of her respecting people in power because she didn't want to take on authority comes to a head with these final betrayals. And she's like, you know what? Like, I have all this power. It's time for me to do something with it. And that's how we end Dragon Republic, which I really enjoyed.
That makes sense, Charles. I enjoyed that too, and I think that it's cool to see throughout as she learns lessons like, hey, I can be a leader without being literally Alton.
Yeah, right.
I mean, just down to when she's using the trident.
Yeah.
And people keep telling her, why are you using this thing? And we as readers are probably thinking the same thing. Why are you using the trident?
Yeah.
Just use a sword.
Yeah.
And she's always used swords before, and then she goes and decides to get the trident melted down,
That was a great
and she
moment.
has she has every opportunity not to, because the smith, I guess it is, who she goes to get done, keeps being like, hey, this is kind of one of a kind. You're never going to get this back. Are you sure?
Right.
Positive? All this kind of stuff. And she's like, yes, I am sure, because it's not about a weapon anymore. It's about saying, I'm going to be my own person as a leader,
And this was after
not
she
Alton.
broke the seal, right? So
Mhm.
breaking the seal, like the metaphor of her literally putting Alton behind her and kind of getting over him, and uh, it was only after she did that she was ready to forge her own weapon, which another metaphor for how her character arc played out by the true end of the book.
So something that's interesting, Charles, with the whole breaking the seal thing, that whole Alton fever dream situation
Mm-hmm.
that she's going through when they're trying to break the seal, that doesn't really work so much as the binding her to Kitai is what
Right.
is helpful for making this all work and getting her fire back. And it's interesting. I'm not sure if we've seen it all come to fruition there or if it really will, but there's something too, maybe, that when she's really able to move on is when she actually quite literally starts to rely on, in every way possible, by binding with Kite, the like the only person who has actually just been a consistent, supportive, grounding presence in her life,
Right.
where all these other people she's tried to rely on, they have like these second sides to them that are usually abusive to her.
Right.
And finally, she's aligning herself by the end, mostly with people who have just always, or at least with Kite. I can't say his name. I'm not sure how do you say that one, Charles?
Kite?
Kite,
I say
Kitai,
Kite, but
Kite.
yeah.
Okay, I'll say Kite just because I said it a couple different ways. I just got to sell on one so people know what I'm talking about. Kite is someone who's just been a good friend,
Right.
and
No, I
now
think
she's with him.
you touched on something really crucial there for Vin. That's not so explicitly stated.
Rin.
Rin. I'm sorry. Did I say Vin?
Yeah.
I'm going back to
Shout out to
yeah.
Mistborn.
Shout out to Mistborn, Brandon Sanderson.
It's a hard one.
Yeah, Rin. You because Vin also had trust issues and
Yep.
didn't have a home, didn't have a good sense of family. So it's an interesting comparison here, because the point I wanted to make was that you touched on that moment, and you made a good observation in that one of Rin's biggest issues and why she's been struggling so much to this point is because she has no home or identity or family and no one to trust. Anyone she's ever tried to serve under has betrayed her in a way, and she's desperately looking for a connection. And I think while and it takes, like in this world of fantasy, it takes a magic rule where you are literally binding two people together through magic and entwining their destinies to earn that kind of anchorage and that kind of trust. And I think you said it great when you said that Kite is her anchor, and that's really what got her out of this funk with Alton and really got her to embrace more of a leadership role when she got to like bind herself to Kite. It's like, okay, now Kite is someone I can trust because he's not going to betray me, because if he kills me, he dies. So it's like I can trust him. And she always felt that way anyway, but now it's like official, right? They're binded together. So once they were like, there's that scenes right after they were binded that they're in the boat and they're getting a sense of her powers, and Kite's causing Rin to think about her powers in a different way, as a tool that can be measured and honed, and the possibilities of it are endless. They use flying machines, and the fire is like fueling the flying machine, and all these things that she really caused her to gain confidence and gain, strength, and not in the way of like being able to burn things. She always had that strength, but the strength in herself and in her community, which she's starting to build here with this binding of Kate. I think you were right on when that's a huge critical moment for Rin. Super interesting.
Right. And for someone who struggles so much with self-worth like Rin does throughout these first couple books, it makes sense why she almost doesn't see herself as deserving of someone like Kite in her life, and
Hmm.
there's almost this tension to that where she throws herself all in. She'll do anything that uh, Vistra or Alton, people who literally hit her and
Yeah.
things like that. Uh, she'll do whatever they say, but she's arguing with Kite all the time
Yeah,
in
and she
these
gets
first
mad at
couple
him too.
books.
It's like,
Yeah.
why are you letting me do this? It's obviously hurting you. And he's like, I'm fine. Like, just keep
Hmm.
training. So it's interesting. You're
But and just that she'll argue with him about like basically everything. I think she even says that when they're getting binded together. She's like, "We're very different. We fight about everything." When she's talking to Kara about how she feels like her and Chagan are very, very similar,
mm-hmm.
and yeah, it's interesting that Rin pushes back against the one person who treats her well,
Right.
and very she's easily weaponized by people who treat her the way which she probably thinks she's deserving of being treated, which is as if she says in this book, like a dog or something
Right.
more worthless than a person. So I'm interested to see now that it seems like she's started to get more belief in herself as a leader and maybe more self-worth. We'll see where that starts to take us in The Burning God when that comes out. I'm interested to see where it goes. It feels like with R.F. Kuang's writing, which gets labeled as grimdark
Yeah.
sometimes, it feels like things are not going to necessarily end happy. But I am interested to see where Rin's arc ends up and if this ends up being a good change for her. It feels like it should be a good change, but with someone as ruthless as her, we'll see.
Right. I mean, she said some pretty alarming things at the
Hmm.
end, which makes you think, like, she's going to be a great ruler, but she's also not going to be someone that you might like. She might be someone you're terrified of. She's basically. She's like basically Viceroy, but serving herself. She's become that type of person. So it will be definitely interesting to see how that plays out in the third and final book, because she's built up to the point now where she has that confidence, she's accepted that responsibility, and there's a quote where she's like, this is basically a numbers game and I've got tons of lives to spare because there's
Hmm.
tons of people I can throw at them, and I will
Yeah,
throw them at them over and over again, however many lives it takes to beat them, which is kind of an alarming thing to hear, where
for
it's like,
sure.
I will march thousands of people against the the war machines of the West, the Hesperians, where it's like, I will just throw bodies and bodies and bodies at you until eventually we destroy your superior technology. It's like, that's going to take a lot of lives. And she's
Hmm.
more than willing to spend it at this point. So it will be interesting to see how she balances that ruthlessness with her responsibility.
For sure. I mean, the the book does end with her her and the Phoenix basically in total agreement for the
Yeah.
first time,
Yeah.
maybe since I would say they were probably in total agreement at the end of the first book when she does the destroys Mugen.
Right.
But yeah, there's a together spoke the Phoenix, we will burn down this world. And you never want to be on the same page as
The
the
god of
Phoenix.
chaos.
Yeah,
No.
so yeah, probably not going to go in a happy direction
Right. We're
here.
happy that Rin has her confidence, but also she's confident in going to war and causing lots of people to die, which will be an interesting dynamic to see, where it's like, what is the cost of having confidence and believing in yourself so much that you're willing to make decisions that affect thousands of lives, you know? So
Mhm.
what kind of sociopath do you have to be to command an army like that? I don't know. Like, we'll see.
Kuang does such an interesting job of balancing what feels like very real character growth with someone potentially becoming a worse person.
Yeah,
It feels like
that's
she's
so
been doing
true.
that throughout, where
Yeah.
we were just talking about Vin and Brandon Sanderson's work, and Sanderson's work, I won't spoil anything on, but is so much more hopeful.
Yeah.
And it's like when characters, at least our protagonists in a Sanderson work, when they go through character growth, that is synonymous with becoming better people, essentially.
Right.
And in Kwang's work, uh, I don't know. It's oftentimes becoming worse people while growing through your own insecurities.
That's
So
so
you don't see a
true.
lot of
That's a
this.
brilliant observation because you see people in power, you see like famous war generals or presidents or emperors or things, and it's like when you learn about the stuff they've done, it's not great, you know, and it's I think Kwong really taps into that with Rin. It's like her character growth has been tremendous, especially in Dragon Republic, where now she's fully embraced her leadership role. We're happy for her. She's no longer the pawn of all these horrible people, but now she's essentially become one of those horrible
Yeah,
people. She's going to have to spend thousands of lives in a bloody war. She's trying to do the same thing that Viceroy is trying to do for the Republic, and the Queen is the Empress Daji is trying to do for the Empire. And it's like she's basically on the same level as them now. So how is she going to be any different? That's a really great observation. It's like her character growth was tremendous, but now she's much more dangerous and she's much more has much more potential for destruction, which we know is a huge part of this book. That power at a cost kind of thing. So we'll see how it goes.
for sure, Charles. Well, I'm glad I'm glad we got to have a lot of discussion about Rin and her arc because I think that is
The core of
that's what
this
these
book.
books are. Yeah,
Hmm.
right. I mean, sure, it is military fantasy, and there's a ton there with the tactics and the fighting that's going on.
Yeah, the
But at
boat
least for me,
stuff.
yeah, the naval battles and whatnot. But for me, this series is about it's about Rin and her transformation and journey throughout, and
For
to be
sure.
able to really give it the time to speak about that directly rather than only plot points, I think is it serves
Right.
us well here.
Yeah.
But I do want to see, unless you do have more
No,
there,
no,
Charles.
I was agreeing with you completely. I think for me, the selling point of this series is one, the setting, but two, the character of Rin. And I think you hit the nail on the head with this idea of character growth versus like embrace, like being a good person is a super interesting one. And the idea of like Kwang taking two different attributes that we normally take side by side, like self confidence and responsibility, and character growth and being a good person. And she completely splits them and puts them in totally opposite ends of Rin's character. And that's what makes Rin so interesting to read. So 100% agree. But I'm ready to hit some plot points. Is there one earlier on we should go back to?
Well, we pretty much just got to the point where the Psych joined Visor's army way at the beginning there.
Right.
I think honestly we've hit on probably what we need to from that, right? Like
Right. It's
her
just interesting to
starting
see,
to.
okay, the Pirate Queen betrayed her,
Mhm.
and now she's going to uh, join Viceroy. And so this is the beginning of a long series of betrayals. And so that's just something worth pointing out. But yeah, the plot moves on, and she joins the Republic, and her power gets sealed. Is there anything you wanted to talk about up to that point where she encounters Dodgy again and her power?
Daji pretty directly tells Rin all the things that she'll tell Rin again at the end of the
Yeah.
book, but Rin's finally ready to actually hear it. And I think we as the readers are too. I really like how Kuang is able to. It just feels like Kuang does this really good job of subverting some of these things, like Daji is the evil person trying to tell Rin why she actually is a hero of her own story, and who Rin is with is the bad guy in her story, so you should join me. And villains do that all the time in
Right.
books, right?
Hmm.
And Daji does that here, and we kind of just take it for that, or I did kind of just take it for that face value. I did know Visor's not a great guy, but I was kind of like thinking the Republic is better than Dashi, from what we've seen from Dashi anyway,
Right.
and that Rin was kind of on the lesser of two evils. And then to have basically a circle back to, hey, Rin should have listened to the who we thought the villain was the first time
Right.
is is really interesting, and not something I feel like I've seen before.
Well, yeah, and it's not so much listened to because I think Rin made the wise choice of not listening to either one of them at that
Mhm.
point. But she did because in the beginning we didn't know things about Viceroy, right? That he kind of let the Third Poppy War happen and he embraced it and he withheld support to strengthen his own position to start a civil war, right? So those things we didn't know. We didn't know how at the mercy of the Hesperians he was willing to be and how he was going to use Rin and all of her psych shaman brethren as pawns to trade with the Hesperians. And so now she's at the eve of this battle, and the Hesperian fleet have washed up at the end of this book, right? And have finally come to give their support. Daji, now that she's been defeated, is like, well, hello, don't you see what's happening here? Like, you should have listened to me from the beginning. This kind of stuff is happening. And Rin lets her go, mostly probably because Daji still has her powers of being able to compulse people to do things, but also maybe in part that she wasn't ready to fully write off what she had to say at that point either. So, yeah, it's interesting how that same message from the beginning to the end kind of holds true, but Rin kind of treats it differently. Yeah, it's a great point to bring up.
Yeah, the message doesn't change, but Rin does,
Right.
which is, and the fact that it feels natural both times is such a testament
Yeah,
to Kwang's character writing of Rin.
absolutely.
And yeah, Rin gets a little bit more of the background from Daji in the second time, but it's the same message that Viceroy is, or basically Daji is trying to say that Viceroy is the lesser of two evils, and Viceroy tries to pitch it the other way. And Charles, that was very Witcher of you to you responded to my, hey, maybe she should have listened to Daji with that she shouldn't have listened to either of them,
Yeah,
to go where
yeah,
I was saying
yeah,
the lesser of two evils and you were saying that you'd rather her not choose at all, right,
yeah.
Charles?
Right, right, right. Exactly, and that for me was a huge part of this book that I enjoyed was that she did finally make that decision. 100%. And we've gotten tons of warnings about Viceroy throughout this
Yeah.
whole book. And it's like Rin didn't pick up on any of it. And I'm kind of on the fence about that. Like, how many times do we have to have that foreshadowing that Viceroy's bad? And there's one good line that justifies a lot of it, where she said, where in the book she mentions, all she knew was that it felt good to be a part of Viceroy's army, to act on Viceroy's orders, to be Viceroy's weapon and tool. If she wasn't making the decisions, then nothing could be her fault. So that is kind of her justification for entering the army. That and her just attraction to Viceroy as a leader and his commanding presence, and he's willing to take her under his wing a little bit. So that also, that sense of belonging kind of pulls her in, and her need for approval at the beginning of the book. We talked about her arc. She's still at the beginning at this point. So she's still seeking that approval. So, and she's still shirking responsibility. So all that together kind of justifies how she stuck along for the ride as long as she did. It pulls her in there. So
I think it makes total sense, Charles. I mean, this is someone who's committed single-handedly in Rin, committed genocide.
Mhm.
And for her to seek a way to basically act on what I see as like violent impulses and maintenance of her own identity in terms of being a soldier,
Mhm.
for her to seek a way to have those things while having minimal fault,
Right.
it makes total sense from someone who's at fault for probably the worst thing that anyone, at least living in Rin's world, has ever done.
Right. And also, she was kind of forced into joining him, right? Because it's like, well, I could just let the Pirate Queen kill you, or now that I have you, I could kill you myself. So you really have no choice but to join. So I get that she, like, Viceroy is clearly showing himself to be a good negotiator, manipulator, leader in these moments. This kind of militaristic aspect of the Poppy War kind of plays in here. And so she kind of, although she chose to join, she also kind of didn't really have an option at this point. So um, that was interesting as well. Um, yeah, so that's her joining the army, joining the
Well,
Republic.
she also joins because of Neja,
Right.
who, I mean,
Oh,
it's clear
Neja.
to it's clear to everyone but Rin at this point that she has some feelings for Neja, and
Mm-hmm.
I think obviously that's playing some sort of role. And she's asked at points like, "Hey, would you even be here if it weren't for him?"
Right.
And don't feel like she has a good answer for that.
Right, yeah, once she starts to gain the trust and going out campaigning as part of the Republic, she starts to have the opportunity to bail, she doesn't, and she actually even doubles down on this soldier role. She, by Jinza basically demotes her, and she kind of embraces that demotion. She's like, "Good, I just need to be told what to do right now because I really don't want that responsibility." So instead of getting away while she could potentially, or getting an even stronger influence within the Republic, she just falls further and further into that role of I'm a tool, I'm a soldier, just tell me where I need to go, what I need to do, so I
Right.
don't have to think about the weight of the decisions that I'm making. I'm just following orders. And that she brings it really down to where she's literally like a foot soldier in the army.
Exactly. And it was interesting seeing that happen just because I don't know. Another thing that we don't get a lot of in fantasy is someone who's literally just a foot soldier.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like we usually get people a little higher up, right? We get royalty and things like that as point of view characters. So to see Rin just in the thick of things, just being a grunt, if you will,
Right.
is even though of course she has a lot of skills from her time in the military academy, but she doesn't have powers at this point, or at least she can't access them at this point because of the seal.
For sure. So she's fighting as a foot soldier, and
Nailed it.
nailed it. And the river gets poisoned at the Dragon Republic capital. So they go to war on this huge naval campaign. This is where we get a lot of militaristic set pieces. We get all the different kinds of ships, like the warships versus the sleeker navigating ships and things like that. Definitely earning that militaristic adjective in the description of this series. And that was fun to read. They're kind of blowing their way through. They have the superior naval force at this point. They meet little resistance. They're on their way up to the capital. Um, they have a run-in with an old classmate. I don't want to put us on the spot. Do you remember the name of that classmate from Syndergaard? She was a woman, and
Is it with an
yeah, it's with an
like Young
N.
or something like
Yeah,
something?
and
I'll look it up while you're talking,
thank
John.
you. So I'll just kind of set the scene here. So they're kind of following the river, right? Kate has discovered that they're using like pig bladders and filling them with poison, and by the time the bladder disintegrates, it's already far enough downstream that it only affects the south and not the north. So it's a way of kind of getting the poison down south, and they trace it back to basically the center of the the source of the poison. Did you find the name?
Yeah, it is Nyang. I
Niang.
don't know if I'm saying it like pronouncing it correctly, but Niang.
And that was an interesting moment. So it's Kate and Rin, and then they run into Niang, and they have a little back and forth. They're on opposite sides of this war. And I think this is the first time it's like, wow, we are at war with a classmate. Like, Kate, didn't you have a crush on her or something? It was like, that was before she poisoned the well, which was an interesting
Fair.
little side moment there.
I think that that's something that Kuang does extremely well too. Is she's great at using uh, basically the pieces that she has let's say on the chessboard, if you will, where she sees, oh well, I need this moment to hit harder here, where they find the wells poisoned and stuff like that. So she's like, oh well, I'll just take someone from the academy and move them there, and that doubles up the impact of this because you get to have Kite kill a classmate,
Yeah, and
which
that was a
is
great moment where it's that kind of directness where I think the actual line is "F this," and they say the whole thing because it's grimdark fantasy. He's like "F this" and just shoots her like mid sentence, which I was like, "Thank you, like let's move this along." And it's also kind of a turning point for Kate. Kate has been so shaken by all of this wartime violence, and you start to get a little concerned for him. He's starting to get a little more callous, a little more disassociated with what's going on. And I think this was a turning point for him where he so directly took a life, and he took the life of someone he grew up with and went to school with. It's also a great foreshadowing tool where they're like, wow, I didn't consider that we would be going to war against our classmates. This idea of like, not everyone's all buddy anymore. So all of that together made a really interesting scene.
well said, Charles. I think the last piece that I would want to mention around this part of the book would be around when Aracha, which is the character that can turn their body into water, that's in the
Oh
barrel and
yeah,
stuff.
that gets poisoned. Yeah.
Yeah, so Aracha dies. Another good use of the pieces that Kuang has to work with, where it's like, okay, I don't really have a place for Aracha anymore, and they're already poisoning the water, so might as well have a character die.
Right.
And kind of cause Kuang, I would bet, knows that we are not probably overly attached to Aracha. We haven't seen that much of this character.
Right.
She plays it so that Rin, who we're super tight to the perspective of, also is kind of like, I didn't know Aracha that well, and she just sees Aracha as this loss of a chess piece, basically, that Rin could be working with. And I feel like it's pretty awesome because it could have been almost maudlin in the sense that we are seeing a character die, but we as the readers maybe don't know them that well, and sometimes authors will try to make us like feel things for characters.
Yeah, they might start writing in these moments. Yeah. All of a sudden you're like, uh-oh, I have a bad feeling about this character. Yeah. Like, why is all of a sudden we're getting this moment where the main character and the side character share a little back and forth? But no, it's just like, up, another chess piece gone. That's unfortunate.
Yeah, and I feel like instead that becomes this moment which helps drive home how far gone Rin is.
Right.
Because Rin presumably does know Aracha a little better than we do. There was kind of a time skip between.
And at that point, she was still kind of responsible for him as well. Yeah. She hadn't been demoted yet, so.
So kind of seeing her take this loss in the way that we as readers are taking the loss because we don't know Aracha that well, I feel like makes us see how far gone Rin is. So Kuang just helps use this as character development for Rin rather than trying to make us just feel things about Aracha that we probably wouldn't have felt.
For sure. And it wasn't long after that Aracha died that she was demoted. So another reason she's like, I'm not fit to rule these people. I don't even command these people. I didn't even care about that guy. So that was one of her many reasons for being at peace with losing command and being a foot soldier up until Jinza's fleet makes it pretty close to the Empire, and then they suffer that big defeat. And the wind god returns and messes up their ships. The Empire was waiting for them. They had a fleet prepared. They basically blew them out of the water. And that's
Quite literally.
quite literally. And that's what gets us to the hinterlands and our introduction to the Keterids and the Namads, not hinterlanders. That is not a politically correct term for their group of people because they're different tribes that happen to live in the hinterlands. It's not their identity, so just a little side piece there.
Good on you, Charles. Yeah, it's an interesting scene, especially from almost a world building perspective. It does. I feel like the hinterlands are mentioned multiple times before all of this plays out, and you know that Chagan and Kara are from there, but it's kind of more of an idea than really anything that's fleshed out until we get to see some of their culture and actually get to see that they are probably the ones who best understand the pantheon and the gods and how to interact with them. And we get some background on where the trifecta comes from,
right,
from them as well.
And that they were kind of unsavory characters themselves too, which is interesting. And that the Dragon King might still be alive was also like a piece that they kind of played in that.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what does or doesn't develop from that because it's pretty open-ended right now. The thing they introduced was that, well, if you're bonded, you basically can't live without the other person being alive unless you die in the same exact place and do something to make sure only one of you leaves. And I kind of thought when this happened, I was like, oh, Kid A is screwed. Was kind of, but they actually went the route of, and maybe he is long term, but they went the route of showing it more through Chagan and Kara,
right?
With having Kara die, and yeah. So when it comes to it's the Dragon Emperor is the what's the right way to Dragon
he
Emperor.
He is the Dragon
the
Emperor, yeah. If you're talking about the trifecta member, yeah, he was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there was the prophecy that said, like, one of you will die, one of you will be imprisoned in stone or whatever, and one of you will rule, I think, something like that.
Yeah.
And it's, it's interesting. The Dragon Emperor could just be dead.
Right.
Right? Mm-hmm. It feels maybe too easy. But if the Dragon Emperor died and Zhang and Sudaji were around during that, then he could have just gone and not taken them with him.
That's true. Absolutely. We get removing the seal. We finally part ways with Alton. I felt like for so long, I never felt that Rin and Alton had a romantic relationship. Kind of what I liked in the first book was that anytime someone tried to use Alton to sway her, it didn't work because they always assumed there was this romantic connection and there really wasn't. And that's how she kept being able to like thwart all these attempts on her for her to be influenced. And then we finally get to the seal, this fever dream, and then she's finally able to just kill him in the dream and be able to remove the seal. So for me, I'm like, okay, great. Like, we can be done with Alton now. Good riddance, kind of a thing. Like, I'm happy that Rin was able to finally get past that.
I mean, I like the stuff with Alton, and I think we did talk about this in one of our 2 Poppy War Buddy Read discussion episodes, Charles, where I think when we're talking about when she killed that monster that took Alton's face, I can't remember the name of the monster right now, but I think I was thinking there might be a little bit more there, and you were thinking that it was just that monster was grasping at straws because Rin doesn't care about anyone.
Right.
But it's interesting. I said back then, right? Like, it's interesting that it chose Alton instead of Kite.
Uh-huh.
And where we know she cares about Kite, and not in the way that she loves a romantic partner but seems to love Kite, that the monster would choose Alton. And I've always thought, yeah, maybe it's more of an infatuation or a
Right. Alton's
crush.
always been romanticized like a
Mm,
celebrity or something, whereas
exactly.
Kate was like her friend. So
Hmm.
it's different when it's Alton, right? The poster child at Singard and now the commander of the Psyche versus Kite, who is of a noble birth and is super super smart, but is also like kind of at her level. I think that's a
True.
huge distinction.
Yeah.
And
All
I
right.
think that
So,
yeah, they were pulling on that romantic draw for a long time, and maybe she did feel that kind of infatuation with him, but I never got the sense that it was truly like a romance. And then finally, Rin was
no.
able to move past it by like killing him, which I appreciated that as well. Um,
We also get the sense here, Charles, that something probably went down between Chagan and Alton
yes,
romantically.
yes, we
That
do
when they went
earlier
off
on,
together,
right when
yeah,
Chagan was using Rin's seal as a way to try and bring Alton back, right? Was under the pretense that he would be able to break the seal for her or guide her to the place to break the seal. He was just using her. Another good example of of her being used for manipulation was in those moments. So, yeah, there was a potential relationship that was a little more romantic going on between the two of them, which explained a lot of Chagan's behavior up to this point.
yeah,
Um, we know he's been particularly upset, and they Alton was always the elephant in the room for the two of them. Like that was kind of the trump card that ended the conversation for them. Was when one of them brought up Alton, it was like a personal affront, and they just had to leave the room. So it does kind of put all that into new perspective, which makes it interesting.
on the FTF podcast, we say the Oliphant, the
The
Oliphant
only
in the
fun
room.
in the room, yeah.
Yeah.
Right to our Lord of the Rings buddy reads, yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. So yeah, that was the Oliphant in the room, and we
Exactly.
also get the controversy between Sorkin Sira versus Bector, her son, and Bector willingly releases the Hesperians, knowing that there would be a skirmish and that he could kind of take over power from his mother, which was an interesting uh, kind of military fantasy plot point that developed from this and might have implications in the third book. But I thought it was interesting, another way of using the Hesperians as a tool, and it seems like the Keterids have a lot of knowledge about shamanism and the origins and the mysteries that we still need to figure out about the triads and things like that. So interesting to see how that played out.
But some nobody with a gun can still kill him.
Yeah.
And that's part of what's driven home. And we haven't talked much about the Hesperians or the way that they view the Nakara. And I
I
think
liked how
that,
Rin viewed the Hesperians at first. Like when they introduced themselves, she's like, "That's a stupid name. It's just a garble of
yeah,
consonants. You can't even say that." And then she's like, "Oh, their white skin is weird." So or their creamy skin or something like that. It was interesting to see how someone who's been the victim of racism because of her skin tone and her name and the way she pronounces things kind of perceives this foreign entity. I thought it was an interesting kind of dichotomy there of her personality, which I got a laugh out of. It's interesting to see like that kind of Western fantasy group come in as the foreign group and how they're
yeah,
perceived kind of from this alien as these aliens, right? And you get this
mhm,
interpretation of how they're perceived on face value. I thought that was a really fun perspective that Rin had for the Hesperians, which basically
for sure.
represents European or American
Yeah.
Western ideas.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out because it feels like we get pretty direct parallels for China and Japan. I was trying to figure out, is Hesperia, is it like Britain? Is it just supposed to represent kind of like Western partners, like that could be the U.S. or could
I
be
get
Britain,
strong
or is
British
it a direct
vibes because
parallel?
of the huge navy and this
That makes sense.
imperialism mentality
Hmm.
and like guns. It seems like this is the early invention of the gun. It seems like guns are relatively new. So for me,
And
it has an early imperialism vibe, but who knows? It could be
I,
anything.
yeah, and arquebuses is a real word that is the word that they use for guns in this. I thought it was like, oh, it's interesting. She made up her own word for gun,
No, I was familiar
but
with the
yeah,
phrase, at least the
I was
phrase like
not.
a, because those old school guns that are basically have the huge tubes
Hmm.
as the firing end. You know, you kind of just dump the gunpowder in it and it shoots like it's just a giant, like a little hand cannon.
Hmm. Gotcha. Yeah, no, I didn't know that word, so maybe I'm just out of the loop, and most people know that. But I was like, ooh, it's interesting that she made her own
You
word
weren't
for
paying
guns.
attention in AP European history, Dylan?
No, I guess I wasn't. Shout out to Miss Haller,
Yeah, our history
our
teacher.
AP Euro. She's my favorite teacher, so I think got a shout out to Miss Haller.
Yeah. So, yeah, that was. Yeah, I'm a fan of the Hesperians. I think they're this nice, and they were this
You're a fan of them?
as a piece of this, right? Like
Okay.
they're this idea, like oh, they're coming, and then they're kind of they're kind of this like looming force, right? That everyone's kind of warning her about. It's like once they come in, they're just gonna do their own thing, and they don't care about you at all, right? And she kind of acknowledges that, and it's kind of put off for a while. So yeah, it's just an interesting piece there.
It is, and you do see Kuang drawing from her vast knowledge base of these matters by showing how the Hesperians come in and view uh, people in Nikon as being like less than
Yeah,
human.
yeah,
I mean, just like trying to make kind of this half theology, half science attempt at it that is just like we can see it from Rin's perspectives and hopefully our perspectives as just like straightforward racism,
yeah,
but to see how it's pitched in this way that like it's scientific was true to history, and it's I think well done from Kwong to depict that from Rin's perspective. I think especially people who aren't super familiar with all that history might learn some stuff, and
for sure.
I
Even
think
people
great
familiar with
perspective to be getting.
reading modern fantasy that's in like a swords and sorcery European kind of setting, to see the narrative kind of flipped here to have like an Asian perspective looking out to seeing the Hesperians, this what we're more used to with some of the more popular works of fantasy being the like alien invaders, is an interesting use of perspective that I thought was really well done here.
Well said, Charles.
So they suffered that horrible defeat. The seal's broken. Kite and Ren are binded, which I think we did a good job of covering that. And there's this brief moment where they reunite with, where Rin reunites with Auntie Fang and Kasigi. I don't have too much to say on that, other than this kind of goes back to like, why didn't you just go to a hut? And, it's like you were trying to marry me off. It's like, yeah, and you would have lived a better life than any of us. Like,
Mm.
I wasn't that bad to you. That you had an out. All you had to do was uh, be uh, be willing to get married, and then you could have had all the comforts that all of us don't have. So it's like you had that out, which was it the I'm not saying that that was like the right choice, but it was an interesting way to address this idea of like, you could have settled, you had that option, and
Sure.
she never once considered it as a
Eh,
possibility. So it's an
I
interesting little
think
reuniting there.
lots of things have gone awry to make Rin's life as awful as it has become. Not the least of which her own choices, but also just the fact that this happened to her while a war was about to break out. I
Right.
mean, there's another version of Rin's story where maybe she does it during a more peaceful time and basically gets herself way like so much upward mobility that she never could have had otherwise by getting to Synagard. It's
It's
just
true.
gone. And I guess she's still got that upward mobility, but her life has sucked. So, but just about everyone's life is sucking right now in
Right.
Nakar, like the Nakar Empire,
That's fair.
because of how crappy their situation is with all the war. But I don't know. I think she had to do what she had to do to get to
Oh yeah, like
Synagard.
I don't question her choices, but it's an interesting
Yeah.
perspective where Rin's you could tell still had feelings of like you were trying to sell me off. How could you do that to me? And she was like, "What are you talking about? Like you were going to live a better life than I had, you know. If you had married this guy, you would have been more comfortable than me. I did the best I could for you," which is an interesting perspective. We don't typically look back on Auntie Fang as someone that we like, but
I
she
still
was.
don't, Charles.
I mean, she was being more realistic about these things. She could have been a little more supportive of
So
the
Logan Nine
synagogue. Yeah,
Fingers.
she could have been a little more supportive of the synagogue thing. But she could have had faith in Rin that she would do well. She could have not been a drug dealer, but you know what? At least she did that one thing, right? Where she was like, I was, you know, you were going to live a better life than the rest of us. But again, not like. And then Kasigi is like, hey, like, you left me. How could you do that? And she's like, honestly, I don't really care about you that much. Sorry. Like, I'm worried about my own stuff. And, like, we aren't really family. So
You can tell she kind of cares, but it's
she
just
realized that she never thought about him for a long time. And she is kind of
true.
upset by that. But she's like, if I'm being totally honest, I never, like, once I left, I never looked back.
Hmm.
And he was like, you left me behind. Like, your choice to improve yourself screwed me. So, yeah, no, it's kind of interesting.
Well, it's it's
I also
interesting,
was like,
Charles, because
they
this also
ran
starts
into each
to.
other. Also, it was like really coincidental. I was like, what is this? Like, that all these people, all these refugees, and now we're like running into each other here, and I don't know. She may have gone
Eh,
look. Did she go looking for them? I can't
yes,
remember.
she was
Yeah.
looking. Well, she was looking actually for Tutor Feyrick, and she does
Oh,
not
right, right,
find
right,
Tutor
right, right.
Feyrick, and then she comes across Auntie Fang and Kasegi instead. I
Okay.
mean, I don't know. Is it that
No, it's fine.
it's a book?
It wasn't
You
even
know,
like a
like
huge, like, important moment either. It was just interesting to see them again.
it's it starts to set the foundation here, Charles, for her decision to try to be the champion of the South.
That's fair, yeah, for sure. Because it's Kasigi who tries to get her to join the Rooster province to defect before the last battle on the Republic capital.
Yep.
And she was like, no. One, it's just a bad idea. And two, what have you guys ever done for me? I owe no allegiance to you. So she does eventually join the Rooster Republic, right, and join the South. But in that moment, she wasn't quite ready. Uh, she hadn't gone through what she went through in this last couple pages of the book here that we're on with this last battle. So she refuses to join the Rooster Republic and defect, and she goes into battle, armed with her flying suit.
Oh, Charles, we didn't talk about Neja being a
I was
shaman
literally
at
about
all.
to get there,
But
and
that's way back,
yeah, it's way
right?
back, but there's a defining moment before the battle starts, kind of where she's like, "You could end all this by embracing the shamanic powers," and he was like, "I don't want it." And then there's this interesting moment where Rin kind of hates him for like because she never considered that to be an option, like not take the power and live independently. Like that's an option that you can have and that you can live a full successful privileged life with. You know, she kind of gets upset by that, and I thought that was an interesting reaction to her conversation with Neja there. She calls him a coward at one point for not using it. Uh,
Yeah, I mean, their relationship is one of the cores of this book. I don't know if we've done it that much justice by
Not yet. We're
not
already pretty
talking that much
maxed on
about it.
time, so we'll do our best to
Yeah,
cover it quickly.
yeah. I mean, I think just important to know because they're kind of like they're training together. You're getting a ton of their interactions throughout, and it's very clear that the two of them have some sort of special bond
Hmm.
that they care a lot about each other, but they're also very, I don't know if suspicious is the right word, but there's tension there that
Yeah.
has been there since they first met. So they have this kind of love-hate relationship. It's touched on pretty directly in the text, right? She either wants to hit him or kiss him every time she
Right.
sees him, something
Right.
like
And there's
that.
that interesting. I'm skipping ahead a little bit, I think, where Neja's like, "How come we were such enemies? How come you hated me so much?" And Rin makes this very valid observation, and where she's like, "You when you were picking fights with me, I had no other option. I had no home to go back to. I was at a huge disadvantage. This was my everything. I was all invested in this. I couldn't afford to lose any of it. And you come from a place of privilege and of power, and this was just kind of a game to you. And that's the difference." And he was like, "I never considered that. I always just thought you were mean." Like, so it's interesting how he didn't get that perspective until they had this heart to heart conversation.
Right. And it's such a good portrayal of privilege from how Kuang portrays Neja,
Mm,
where oftentimes it's just that you see the world only through the lens with which you've grown up with.
right. I took it for
And
granted, kind of.
Neja, yeah, took for granted, hey, my life has always come with this safety net of being the son of a really powerful lord of a province. And it's just hard for him to truly step out of his shoes for a second and understand, hey, if I'm Rin coming here with no safety net whatsoever, then this isn't like some silly rivalry where we're mean to each other. This is risking everything for me, and I'm suffering consequences that you don't even have to consider because of who you are.
Right. And that was a great moment. And that adds a really nice layer to their relationship. I feel like there were so many moments when they were together. There was one moment where Rin was like, and I knew that everything had changed forever. And, it really didn't. So it was like that happened a couple times in their conversations. I just thought it was super interesting that Rin was, because I forget what Neja said exactly, but it was about shaman, like using like shamanism and something like that. And he said, and he was, I think he maybe called out Alton or something like that. Um,
Yeah, I think he said something racist about her being a Spearly
yeah, Spearly, yeah.
too.
So yeah,
Yeah,
and then she was like, "That was it. Like, we never the same." And then they still had that moment at the end of the book where they were like drinking together, and she wanted to, she was still had romantic feelings for him and things like that, um, which I thought was fine. That's young, like trying to deal with young love and not really fully understanding it. I was on board with it. It was interesting, but I always liked that how different their backgrounds were, their upbringings were, and how that plays a part in their relationship. And I think Kuang does a really interesting job of using their perspectives when it comes to the dialogue that they have. And it came to a head at that one moment where Neza just couldn't understand why Rin didn't like him at times. And it's like, you never once had any empathy towards me, really, this whole time. Like, you couldn't think of how I came up and what my perspective was. And he was like, "No, I never even thought about that." I'm sorry.
yep.
So it was just a fun moment that leads us to this war, right? Not much that we need to say about the war itself, that we hadn't kind of covered already. I really just want to get to after the war, after that meeting with Daji, um, and the betrayal of Neja, right? This big moment.
Yep.
This moment is huge. and I have feelings about it, honestly. I want to push back a little bit here. This is I warned you coming in that I was going to push a little bit. And as much as I love this moment and as this betrayal, I mean, I saw it coming a mile away, miles and miles and miles away. And I know there's many moments throughout this that we had already talked about where Rin was like, "Hey, as long as I don't have to decide, or as long as this or that," and her potential romantic entanglement with Neja and all these things. But still, it's like the minute she's like, "This is the day I'm going to escape," and then Neja's like, "Hey, let's go for drinks." Already, I was like, did he poison the drinks? Like, what's going on? Like, he's definitely going to betray her. And I was definitely on high alert in those moments because, like, how many times did we have to get warned? Like, she gets warned even that day before by the guy that she kills for the for the for the leader of the republic, right? She kills the betrayer. She like pulls his heart out and kills him, and he's like, he's going to betray you. And she's like, yeah, I know, I'm already making plans, basically. And even I want to go back to this one scene that I thought that I highlighted. They're eating, this is way back, where she's still in the good graces with Neja, and they're eating like she's showing them around, I think, and they're eating wawa fish. Do you remember this, when they eat wawa fish?
I do remember
And
that,
like
yeah.
they're like, why are they called wawa fish? It's like, well, because when you cook them, you like boil them alive and they scream or something like that. And then they're just like, aren't they hilarious? Neja picked a slice and put it in her bowl. Try it. Father loves them. Where it's like, okay, I take that as an obvious kind of. I mean, this one it's minor, but I always thought it was funny how it's like, yeah, he revels in the pain of these fish as being like an ominous, because she ends a chapter with that, right? It's like makes you think like, oh, he's. It's like, isn't it funny how they're crying in pain, haha? And that's an early warning. And then she's warned a bunch of times by Daji, by the commander that she kills, the warlord that she kills. She's even plotting to escape, and she still, right, gets entangled in this betrayal. I saw it coming from too far away to fully buy in that this was as surprising for Rin as it should have been. I feel like Rin should have been a little more. And even she even said that our relationship was irreparably changed not too long ago from when Neja had those racist comments, and then she kind of reverts back to all of it. I just, the temptation was there, and I get it, but I didn't fully buy into it, and that's my little pushback. It's a great moment, but I was like, come on. Like, I wasn't surprised. Were you surprised by this betrayal?
Uh, I was not shocked by it.
Mm-hmm.
There's also a line where right before Neja asks, "Why do you always think someone's trying to kill you?" And Rin says, "Why wouldn't I?"
Yeah.
Literally, that's like right before he stabs her. I think that, I don't know, it was on my radar that this was very possible, right? And I I just have a little bit of a different take on it,
Mm-hmm.
I think, than you, Charles, and I think your point is very valid. And if you need this to be a twist or something for it to be as enjoyable for you, like, that's fair. It's
I'm not saying I
all
need it to be
subjective
a
and stuff
twist.
anyway.
I'm just saying Rin, as someone who her whole character is that she trusts no one and she's plotting an escape. Like the fact that she herself, Rin's character, right? Like there is the plausible thing of Rin falling for this, and I get that. I just, for me, I feel like it's something she could have seen coming. For me, it wasn't like as obvious of a thing that she should have fallen for. She even knew, she's like, oh, I got to get out of here. I got to escape. This is a tempting thing, but she's like, I just kind of want to feel that connection. I'm like, really? Really? You want to stop and have drinks? Are you crazy? So it's, but I get it. I just had a little
I
pushback.
No, I also felt like it was a bit of a push that there's a lot of justification given as to why she has to have drinks, because if she didn't, then he would suspect something. But that's kind of true. Like, they obviously did suspect all this stuff, and it obviously, they put Daji and Suni, I think, on night watch. Like, they were taking all these precautions where I don't know how much it mattered whether Rin did or didn't know it was coming to some extent if she wanted to escape with all the psych. And I think, and Charles, Rin isn't in a book in her head. She's not like, wow, this scene with the Wawa fish is total
No,
foreshadowing
I
like you
get it.
are.
I get it.
I
I'm
mean,
not saying.
like,
I'm saying there's justification for it. My whole thing was, Rin is even saying, "Don't. Why would I trust anybody?" Right before she gets stabbed.
so
So
here's where part of where I'm going is Rin is what, like 20 at this time? She's barely past being a teenager, I think, if I'm correct about her age. But she's young. This is her what feels like her first potentially requited experience of romantic feelings for someone. I think that's important. She is drunk at the time. Maybe you're saying she shouldn't have even gotten drunk or whatever, but and I don't know. On top of all that, from just like an enjoyment perspective for me, I feel like like what you're saying raises interesting questions about how much does something benefit from being a surprise and how much does something benefit from being almost this inevitable tragedy that you're watching play out. It's like, I don't want to spoil Shakespeare for anyone, but I think like we all know what's coming at the end of Romeo and Juliet because of things, and
yeah,
it's a tragedy, and knowing that in some ways makes it even like better in terms of quality art and enjoyable to watch because you kind of watch this thing play out and it's like, oh, it's so hard to watch. I don't know how much it was
no,
supposed to
that's
be a
a good
twist.
point. And I'm not saying that it needed to surprise me as the reader. Like I can see it coming, and it still happens, and I'm totally fine with that. For me, it caught Rin so off guard. I guess I kind of had believed more in Rin, but you can justify one, she's young and she's kind of romantically involved, and she's so desperate she just wanted to feel normal and feel like she had friends and be in a community for a night, and so all that stuff is there, and I get it. I just think there was so much at stake that I would suspect that someone who was willing to bomb a whole country would say no to drinks, so, and yes, she was kind of forced to accept the invitation to avoid suspicion, but she could have also just knocked Neza out and escaped, So there were options that she had. And I'm not saying that this was something that was bad. I had a little pushback on it. I still think it's great, and I like the twist, and I think the fact that it happened is what pushed Rin over the edge. And like you said, it is this just Shakespearean, to watch the inevitable happen and be tragic is great, and I think that's a lot of what happens here. I just like it kind of goes against Rin's character a little bit.
I mean, it's fair to feel
Still
that
a
way,
great
Charles.
book, still a great moment. As I said,
On
I
the
had a little
FTF
pushback.
podcast, on the FTF podcast, we always honor that people's experiences of the book are allowed to be whatever
what
they are.
do you
I
think,
mean,
listener? As
me
I know
or
what
the
you
listeners?
think already. Trying to get our engagement up. Let's see what the fans have to say.
Yeah, well, if they contact us on social media, they're gonna be interacting with me. It's not you, Charles.
I can still read it and respond if I want to. I have the
Theoretically.
account.
Rarely happens, but theoretically.
Theoretically.
Yep. Yeah. What do you think? I'm glad you stopped directing them to a comment section that doesn't exist, though. That's one of the earlier episodes, I think, has you doing that.
You can still write in the comments. We're on YouTube. A little bit, technically.
Barely.
All
right.
So yeah, great moment, great book, and then we get to the end, which we talked about. Rin's transition to a role of responsibility, of leadership. She accepts the leadership role of the South. Great moment. Super happy she got there.
I got chills with that last line.
Mm-hmm.
So it's where I think Kid A says, then we'll go to war against the strongest military force in the world. And Rin says, they're not the strongest military force in the world. And she slams her fist against the table. I am.
Right.
So
And I think it's like
that's pretty awesome.
and I think she said it with the Phoenix, right? Like
Phoenix,
the
yeah.
Phoenix was also like, I am the strongest force. So yeah, great moment there. Fine, like one of those moments where you're super happy, but like you had brought up, it's like we're happy for her character development, but now there's this new piece on the table that's super violent wild card talking about extending a war and human suffering.
Yeah, it's so strange to balance that ambivalence that comes up around this, where you're happy to see the growth of Rin kind of from being in her perspective and to see her out from all these shadows she's been under with people like Visra and Alton,
Right.
but also scared for what the future might hold with Rin, this assured with herself as a leader, willing to throw whatever it takes to get what she wants.
Agreed. 100%. Really happy with the ending of this book, and it makes me really excited to pick up book 3 when it comes out.
Yeah, I'm pumped for the Burning God. Yeah. I mean, and we've seen now from Kuang how well she can deliver with a sequel, so
That's right.
I mean, I'm excited.
And it is a
to see
trilogy,
how
so
this
this
story
is
comes
the
to
end.
an end.
Yeah. So
This is the end. And I mean, it's amazing she's even been able to tell this much more story after how much she told in that first book.
Right.
So
right.
I'm excited to see where it goes next.
Yes, me as well, dude. Is there anything else you wanted to bring up before we brought this to a head?
Nothing comes to mind right now, Charles.
All right.
Tell them where they can contact us.
Absolutely, but it's not as fun with our little outro music in the background, so let's get that going. All right, everybody, thank you so much for listening to another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast. This has been your host, Charles, along with my co-host, Dylan, and we could not be happier to have discussed the Dragon Republic with you today. So, if you had thoughts, tell us more about Nez's portrayal, let us know. Go ahead and find us on social media at the FTF Podcast. We're also on Twitter at the FTF Podcast with the number 1 at the end. You could also send us an email at theftfpodcast@gmail.com. So go ahead and find us there, rate 5 stars, all that good stuff. Yeah, well, nailed it. Nothing more to say. Thank you so much for listening, and as always, go forth and conquer, friends.